Hi there, Starscream back for my top 10 classic 80s family films. Now there's not something you can say 5 times fast, and I ain't even going to try. The main reason I'm beginning this start off to my review is on the basis that I've left out a lot of films which you would expect it to have been there. Inner Space, Back to the Future, Superman, Ghostbusters, The Goonies, all along those lines. The main reason is because they're too recognisable and too well known. So I thought I'd go for the slightly more obscure, lesser known films. Don't get me wrong, I love all of these films, and if I had to do this top 10 again, they'd all be in it. But I went for the slightly more obscure, as I said, so you know what? Let's get on with it. Let's look at my top 10. Well, here's an interesting little film from the 80s which you're probably not so familiar with, and the name of this film is Ghost Chase. Sounds really creepy and scary, doesn't it? Well, actually, no. It's quite a simplistic story. These two guys want to make films, and it transpires that the one who does the pyrotechnics is in heir to a fortune. Well, the butler of the dead man who tried to prevent him from getting his inheritance, the butler comes back and helps him to get it. As a ghost, of course. All in all, it's worth a watch. Okay, here's one you may have forgotten about. The Explorers. Now, this film is essentially 3 kids who don't have a great time, one of them being played by River Phoenix. Hey, looks like a nerd! Damn, there's hope for us all then, isn't there? That's quite reassuring. Anyway, they all get together and they build a spaceship. Apparently they've stumbled across this program because they keep having the same dream. And as a kid, this really got your imagination going. You were thinking to yourself, maybe it's possible if I accidentally have a dream and work out how to program my spectrum, I'll be out of a spaceship too. So the first 2/3 of this film are great, but the ending really lets it down. It's dopey. It turns out these aliens are just kids and they've been calling them, and the aliens have got parents, and it's just a letdown. So the film has to be relegated to 9th place. Hey, and if anything, just watch the first 2/3 of it. One other thing, the alien in it is voiced by Rob Ricardo, believe it or not. Well, another classic film in the 80s, Short Circuit. This is the first one where Johnny Five comes alive. Actually, what makes this film quite charming is the fact there's no CGI in it. It does have Steve Guttenberg, which I suppose you could class him as CGI, and that weird American who plays an Indian. Not quite sure about that. We know the story. He visits Stephanie. She thinks he's an alien, but he's not. He's from Nova Robotics. She reports it to Nova. They say they're going to come and get him. He doesn't want that because he steps on a bug, and it's apparently meaning that he gets disassembled, he dies. Blah, blah, blah. And they eventually find out that Johnny Five is alive, which is quite clever because Steve Guttenberg quite obviously isn't alive. All in all, it was a great film. I always liked it, and I think I even preferred the sequel. The 80s Flash Gordon. The film was absolutely excellent. It's got so many famous faces in it. I think the only thing that lets it down is Flash Gordon himself, but that aside, everybody you'll recognise. The music's done by Queen, and have any of you ever heard of Jason King? Well, maybe not, but he plays Clytus, and he's hilarious in it. Don't forget Brian Blessed here, and Timothy Dalton, and do remember, he's going to be James Bond. It's one of those films you've got to see it to believe it. Check it out, alright?
This place is a lunatic asylum.
Right, The Young Sherlock Holmes is an excellent film, purely on the basis it was directed by Steven Spielberg, and we know how good he is with tapping into children's psyche for films, and adults for that matter. This isn't what I don't exactly call a kid's film, but I'd call it a family film. There's a few quite disturbing scenes in it, well, from a child's perspective anyway. What are those, Hare Krishnas? Good grief, they get everywhere, don't they? Yeah, don't worry, I'm just fooling. Anyway, it's got some of the best effects I've seen around at that time. Purely because, you know, Steven Spielberg's all into that kind of thing, you know, because being a director and that. I found this bit quite disturbing as a child, and I always wondered how they did it, and I still think it looks kind of good now, don't you agree? Anyway, Young Sherlock Holmes is definitely worth checking out. I think you'll probably appreciate this film more as an adult than you did as a child. Right, down to number 5, and it's The Last Starfighter. I think a significantly underrated film. It's excellent to watch now. I know the effects don't quite cut it nowadays, but to be honest with you, you can appreciate what they were trying to do with this film. The character development is great. The aspect of this guy who flies in because he's created a machine, he's testing people and accidentally ends up on Earth, and now he has to take up the challenge, and the ones they've already enrolled actually get killed, so it's down to the Last Starfighter. It's a great film. I think it deserved more than it got, and if I've introduced some of you to it, you haven't heard of it, good job done. The Labyrinth. All the effects in it were done by Jim Henson's workshop. Brilliant. It'd be CGI now. And the Goblin King, yeah, played by David Bowie. He comes along, he steals her brother and offers her one of his balls. Don't really want to think about that, actually. The film is literally, she's trying to get her little brother back, and he's the Goblin King, and he's trying to stop her by misleading her and tricking her. But you've got to love the film. It's just something that wouldn't happen nowadays. It'd just be that horrible CGI that George Lucas likes to use. Ugh. What really makes this film entertaining, though, is David Bowie's songs in it. They're hilarious. Now, this particular song, I do recall me and a mate of mine getting on the bar and singing. Yes, had a few too many to drink, but there we go. That's the impression, we could remember it word for word. Now, that's a good song. Okay, Return to Oz. Roughly, if you read the books, it's pretty much a sequel to Wizard of Oz. But it's not a nice film, and I wouldn't actually call it a child's film. Those Wheelers scared the hell out of me when I watched this as a kid. She's introduced to new friends that mimic the old ones, like the Tin Man and the Scarecrow. This is Jack Pumpkinhead. But look, this bit scared the hell out of me. You watch this. Tell me as an 8-year-old child this wouldn't give you nightmares. Good grief, what were they trying to do to us back then in the 80s? This film's something else. It's one of those timeless films. It's just something about it. It's not meant for kids, this film. I do love the way they did the stop motion effects. I'm thinking for the Gnome King. It was brilliant. As I said, it's one of them films, yet again I harp on about it. No CGI. It's brilliant. Check this film out if you haven't seen it. But do be prepared, it is not a kids film. Dorothy is anything but happy in this, and she doesn't sing. Flyer the Navigator. Always loved the beginning bit of this film with the dogs chasing frisbees. But that aside, this kid David is asked by his mum to go and get his little brother, who's apparently 8 years old and can't make it all the way home. He falls over, hits his head, and comes back and finds that his parents aren't in the house anymore. And in fact, there's nobody he knows in the house anymore, because now he's in the 80s. NASA in the meantime have discovered this ship that's crashed into electrical towers, and they say that they can help David try and regain his memory and work out what's happened. It's all to do with this ship. And David, later on it transpires, has been programmed by the ship with star charts. Because the ship's crashed, it can't remember it, and it needs the star charts in David's head to go home. Okay with me so far? Right, this is a real film of the 80s. I just had to do a close-up. Look, a Transformer figure! Damn! Anyway, the ship calls him, and he goes to the ship, and they fly around for a bit, have a little bit of a montage. We find out that the robot is Trimaxium, so he calls it Max, and voiced by the voice actor of Pee Wee Herman, if I recall. All in all, a great little 80s film. I loved it. I saw this one at the cinema. I remember getting a bit upset when the music went scary. I wanted to leave. My parents forced me to stay, and thank God they did. It's a great film, and for those of you who haven't seen it, which is probably about 2 people in the world, go and see it. Here we are at last, number 1, and it's Willow. Not a film that's been bettered in my opinion. Lord of the Rings, go eat your heart out, and I mean that sincerely. This film is entertaining, it's got depth, it's got characters, and it's got some brilliant actors in it. Now, Warwick Davis plays the character of Willow, and they're Nelwyns, they're small people, and it transpires that the Daikini baby, so it's from a baby of larger, normal-sized people, he's been entrusted to look after because she likes him, but he needs the help of Mad Morrigan, played by Val Kilmer. Now, the story's relatively complex, as I suppose from a child's perspective, and even from a perspective where I'm trying to explain it to you, so I'm not going to go down that route. All I'm going to say to you is that if you haven't seen this film, you're doing yourself an injustice. Probably one of Val Kilmer's best films, other than that and Tombstone. He actually was superb in this. plays a mad swordsman. Yes, and there we go. Excellent. There's also a few bits of humour, but give and take all of that, it's one of those films that you just don't forget. I remember seeing it the first time it came out, and it stayed with me that long. And it's just a whole host of actors and actresses in it that just makes it what it is, and the effects are part of the time, and there's no CGI! So it's perfect on that front. And you know what I liked about this film? There's a relative body count to it, but it ends on a happy note. We have the classic fairy tale happy ending, which is quite nice. We don't get that very much nowadays, and to be honest with you, I think we should have it more often. This makes it my #1 top family films of the 80s. You gotta see it.